What would you do if the man you'd feared, fought, and maybe even hated, turned out to be someone you already knew? Not from newspapers or wanted posters, but from your past. A different time, a different life. This is the story of one such rancher who spent years building walls around his land and around his heart. He thought he'd buried the worst of the past out in the dust, but one tattoo, barely visible on a stranger's arm, tore the years wide open. If you're interested in more of these heartwarming videos, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stick around because this isn't a story about enemies. It's about what happens when the past rides right up to your gate, and you finally stop running from it. They called him Mack, though nobody knew if that was his real name. Just one of those names that stuck short, hard-edged and easy to remember. Mack hadn't been much for company in the last few years, and most folks in the territory respected that. He ran his spread out past the western flats where the wind never stopped and the soil was more dust than dirt. Not rich land, but stubborn, just like him. Mack wasn't young, but he wasn't old enough to be dismissed. Late 50s, maybe, though the sun and the wind had taken their toll. Deep lines, a beard that looked like it had been cut with a dull knife, and shoulders still broad enough to carry fencing rails solo when he had to. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it came slow, like every word passed through a filter of consideration. Before leaving his mouth, people left him alone for a reason. They said Mack had been in some kind of war before he came west. Not the army exactly, something else. The kind of work that leaves you with scars you don't explain and habits you never fully lose. He'd built his cabin by hand, ran cattle alone, drank rarely, rode into town once a month, bought what he needed, spoke to no one unless spoken to, then rode back out before anyone could ask too much. That was how he liked it. That was how it stayed. Until one dry June morning, when the smoke on the horizon turned out to be more than just windblown scrub catching fire. It started with a rider. Mack saw him from the north rise, a silhouette against the pale gold sky. Just a single figure, coming fast but steady, like he wasn't afraid of being seen. Mack didn't spook easy, but he didn't like uninvited guests either. He saddled his horse, kept his rifle across the pommel, and met the rider halfway between the barn and the fence line. The man didn't stop, right away. Pulled up about 10 yards out, boots dusty, shirt streaked with road wear. His face was lean, weathered, maybe mid-30s, but there was something in the way he carried himself, shoulders squared, chin up, that said he wasn't just passing through. "You Mack?" the rider asked, voice even. "I am." The man dismounted, no sudden moves. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, though Mack knew that didn't mean much. "They said you hire hands out here." "Sometimes I'm looking for work. Just lost my place out near Sand Creek." Mack studied him. His clothes were worn but clean, movements precise, eyes steady. Something about him rang familiar, but not in a friendly way, more like a scent you catch in a breeze that reminds you of something buried. "What kind of work you do?" "Whatever's needed." "Good with horses?" "Yes, sir." "Good with fences?" "Yes, sir." There was a pause. Mack hated decisions made on instinct, but something about this man was digging at him, not in a threatening way, but in a way that wouldn't let go. He didn't trust it, but he couldn't ignore it either. "What's your name?" The man hesitated. "Just a flicker." "Then, Lucas." Mack nodded once. "Got a bunk out back." "You worked for the day. We'll talk about tomorrow." Lucas nodded. He didn't smile, just picked up his saddlebag, tied off his horse, and followed Mack to the edge of the corral without another word. The work went on without trouble. Lucas was competent, efficient, and quiet, the kind of man who'd clearly seen hard days but didn't wear them loud. By sundown, the east pasture was refenced, 2 skittish calves had been tagged, and the old irrigation pipe had been cleared of roots that had been clogging it for months. Mack didn't say much over dinner, just poured 2 cups of coffee, handed Lucas a plate of beans and cornbread, and leaned against the porch rail while Boone, his old mutt, sat at his feet. It wasn't until Lucas reached across the table to grab the coffee pot that Mack saw it, the tattoo. It was on the underside of Lucas's left forearm, just above the wrist. A faded hand-inked emblem of a compass rose, sloppy lines, thick black ink, something a kid might have gotten in a camp long ago. Done with a needle heated over a flame. Mack's breath caught. He didn't speak, just stared. Lucas didn't notice at first. Then, following Mack's gaze, he looked down, flexed his arm, and instinctively pulled his sleeve lower. But it was too late. "Where'd you get that?" Mack asked, the words gravel thick in his throat. Lucas glanced up, defensive now. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." The wind shifted. Even Boone picked up his head, sensing the change. Lucas looked at Mack, then looked away. "Long time ago, back east, someplace I don't talk about." Mack stepped forward, his voice no louder but suddenly heavier. "That ain't just a tattoo. That's a mark from Harlan Ridge." Lucas flinched, just enough to confirm it. Mack swallowed, his hands curling around the porch rail like it might steady him. "You were there," he said, barely above a whisper. "That place." He paused, throat tightening. "That place took my brother." Lucas looked up. "Then you know what it was?" "I do," Mack said, voice cracking, "but I didn't know anyone else walked out." Silence hung between them. The porch, the horses, even the wind seemed to hush. And then, without warning, without planning it, without even meaning to, Mack sat down on the step and cried. His shoulders didn't shake. He didn't sob. It wasn't loud. But the tears came, slow and steady. The first he'd let fall in almost 20 years. Boone leaned against his leg. Lucas stood still. No one said a word. Because in that moment, they both knew the war they'd survived wasn't over. It had just changed shape. For a long time after the tears stopped, neither man moved. Mack remained seated on the porch step, his hat now resting in his lap, palms calloused and still. His face was dry again, but something had been shaken loose, something he hadn't even realized was still buried. Boone leaned into his leg like the dog knew this wasn't just a quiet evening anymore. Lucas stood nearby, his weight shifting slightly as if torn between walking away and staying put. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't dramatic. It came soft and almost accidental, words that might have been meant only for the wind, but found their way out of Mack's mouth anyway. My brother's name was Caleb. Lucas glanced down, unsure whether to respond or wait. Mack didn't seem to be telling the story for anyone but himself. He wasn't built for war. He was too gentle for it. He joined up 'cause I did. Said he couldn't let me go alone. Mack's voice had an edge of gravel to it now, but not the angry kind. It was the kind that comes from trying to say something after holding it too long. We ended up in that godforsaken camp, Harlan Ridge. Do you remember it? Lucas nodded. Once, yeah, I remember. I thought he died there. When the fire broke out and the guards turned us loose like animals, I ran. I didn't look back. Lucas sat down a few feet away, not quite beside him, but close enough to hear everything, without needing to lean in. He set his coffee cup down in the dust and rested his arms on his knees. Most of us didn't make it out, he said. Some died trying to run, others got caught days later and dragged back. I got lucky, caught a ride in a supply wagon headed south. Changed my name in Oklahoma. Been on the move ever since. Mack looked over at him for the first time in a while, not with suspicion, but with the kind of searching gaze that sees beyond the surface. You weren't just a number there, were you? You and Caleb ... You knew each other. Lucas hesitated. We did. Answer settled between them like dust. He was kind, Lucas added. Didn't talk much, but when he did, it meant something. Used to hum when things got real bad. Not a song, really. Just a sound, soft and steady. Kept some of us sane when it got dark. Mack turned away, staring out across the field where the last of the light was falling behind the hills. That humming, he remembered it too. Caleb had done it as a boy, in the barn, in the bunkhouse, during storms when the wind got wild. Just a quiet rhythm to let you know he was there. I should have stayed, Mack murmured. Lucas shook his head. You did what? You had to. We all did. Boone stretched out between them, head resting on his paws. The dog's eyes drifted closed. The only soul between them who seemed entirely at peace. It was late by the time they stood again. The moon had crept over the ridge, and the temperature was starting to drop. Mack offered Lucas the bunk again, without saying much, and Lucas nodded silently in thanks. There was no handshake. No nod of camaraderie, just a quiet understanding that things had changed between them. They were not resolved, but definitely shifted. The next morning they worked the east fence. The line had taken damage in a recent storm, and Mack had been meaning to reinforce it before the wind turned again. Lucas didn't need much instruction. He worked steadily, with the kind of quiet efficiency Mack recognized from his own younger years, someone who carried too much, but didn't show it. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them felt different now, less guarded. As they hauled fresh timber to replace a rotted post, Mack finally asked a question that had been hanging since the night before. Why'd you come here? Of all places, all ranches. Lucas paused, adjusted his grip on the beam, and looked across the dry plain before answering. Didn't know it was you, if that's what you mean. I'd heard about a man out here, quiet, paid fair, didn't ask too many questions. That's what I was looking for. Didn't expect to find a ghost. Mack let that settle. He appreciated the honesty, even if it stung a bit. You got any people? Mack asked after a while. Had a mother, passed 4 winters ago. No siblings. No one else I'd trust. Mack nodded slowly. Same. They worked through the rest of the day without much more said. But by dusk, they had the whole line reinforced and straight as an arrow. Mack even noticed the way Lucas adjusted one corner post, not because it was broken, but because the angle had been off by half a degree. The kind of detail only someone who gave a damn would fix. Over dinner, they sat at the same table this time. Mack poured them each a glass of rye and set a plate of pan-fried beans and ham in front of them. You planning to keep moving? Mack asked after the first sip. Lucas didn't answer right away. I was always figured I would, but now, he trailed off, then met Mack's gaze directly. Now I'm not sure. Mack didn't press him. He just nodded once, as if to say, that's fair. It was the third morning that something shifted again, only this time it came from the outside. Ryder came up from town, sheriff's deputy. Said there'd been talk about Lucas, rumors traveling fast once someone recognized the tattoo while he'd been picking up supplies the day before. A bounty from years back, attached to a name Lucas hadn't used in over a decade. You don't owe him anything, the deputy told Mack, as if it were helpful. He's not your problem. Mack didn't answer at first, just looked at Lucas, who stood off to the side, jaw tight but hands unclenched. Then he turned back to the deputy. You tell the sheriff if he wants to talk. He knows where I live, Mack said evenly. Until then, this man's under my roof. And my roof still means something in these parts. The deputy didn't argue, just nodded, mounted up, and rode off without another word. Mack looked at Lucas. You still want to leave? Lucas considered. I did, but I think if I run again, I'll never stop. Mack set his jaw and nodded. Then stay for now. And in that moment their bond went past the history between them, or the fire, or even the tattoo. It was about something more stubborn and simple, two men with history behind them, fence lines ahead of them, and maybe, just maybe, a future built not from forgetting, but from facing the things they'd both tried to outrun. For a few days, life on the ranch found its rhythm again. Mack and Lucas worked the north pasture where the mesquite had started encroaching past the fence line. The heat hadn't broken, but the skies were clearer, and there was just enough breeze in the morning to make the long hours tolerable. They spoke more freely now, though never too much. Lucas wasn't one to ramble, and Mack respected that. Their conversations came in fits: a shared memory about the smell of army soap, a passing comment about a horse's gait, a laugh at how Boone chased his own tail like a pup despite his aging hips. There was something unspoken between them, and maybe it didn't need naming. Not quite friendship yet, not family either, more like a shared silence that both men understood. But silence only stretches so far in a town like that, and some men don't like seeing peace where they expect punishment. Mack rode into town one afternoon for supplies. He didn't bring Lucas, not because he didn't trust him, but because he knew how the place worked. The tattoo might have faded with time, but to the wrong eyes, it still said everything they needed to feel justified. Lucas had gone into town once, and already word had gotten around. It didn't take much. An old rival drunk with too good a memory. Someone wanting to feel useful again. The hardware store was quiet when Mack stepped inside. A couple of men stood near the far wall thumbing through catalog papers while the clerk boxed up a roll of nails and replacement latches. How's that new hand working out? One of them asked without looking up. Mack didn't answer right away. He finished counting his change, folded it into his coat, and met their eyes calmly. Hard worker, he said. Knows his way around a post-hole digger better than most. One of the men smirked. The other leaned forward slightly, elbows on the counter. That's so. Seems you've got a knack for finding ... colorful company. Mack stared at them for a moment, then took his box and turned to leave. He didn't offer a rebuttal, but he didn't rush out either. His silence, sharp as a well-honed blade, lingered longer than any comeback would have. Outside, the sun hit him hard. He adjusted his hat and mounted up slowly. As he rode back toward the ranch, he passed a few more faces, mostly indifferent, but a few cold. One man didn't even try to be subtle, spitting on the ground as Mack trotted by. He didn't let it show, but the pressure was building. Back at the ranch, Lucas was finishing repairs on the barn door. Boone greeted Mack first, trotting down the slope with a low bark that was more welcome than warning. Mack dismounted and passed the box of supplies over without a word. Lucas took it with a nod, but he saw it right away. The tightness around Mack's mouth, the stiffness in his shoulders. They say something? Lucas asked, not looking up from the latch he was testing. Nothing worth repeating. Lucas didn't press further. Instead, he carried the box into the barn and started laying things out. Mack followed, pulling off his gloves and wiping sweat from his brow. They're not gonna let it go, Lucas said after a pause. That bounty, I thought it had faded by now. It should have, Mack replied. But some folks don't let go of a grudge once they get a taste for it. Lucas sat on the edge of the hayloft, arms resting on his knees. I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Mack. If I've gotta go, I'll go. Mack leaned against the support beam, jaw working slightly as he chewed over the thought. I didn't cry on that porch for a stranger, he said quietly. You and my brother, you made it through something no man should have faced. That counts for more than whatever some half-drunken ranch hand remembers from a poster 20 years old. Lucas looked over at him then. There was a softness in his expression that didn't match the scars on his hands. You're not the kind of man I expected to find out here. Mack huffed a short breath, not quite a laugh, but something like it. Most folks aren't. 2 nights later, the past came riding in. It wasn't a sheriff, not officially. Just 2 men, one with a tin star and too much pride, the other with a long memory and a flask swinging at his hip. They came at dusk, their horses kicking dust along the old path to Mack's gate. Boone growled low from the porch before Mack even saw them. Lucas stepped out of the shed, wiping grease from his hands. He saw the riders and froze. Mack met them at the gate. We heard you've got a wanted man on your property, said the one with the badge. He didn't dismount. Name of Lucas Booker, escaped custody. Carried a mark. Mack didn't flinch. He's here, works for me. The men exchanged a look. The one with the flask spit off to the side. You planning to hand him over? Mack stepped closer to the gate, letting the wood creak beneath his boots. You planning to do this by the book, or you here for something else? Silence. The man with the badge sighed. It's a hell of a thing, Mack. You take in a man with a price on his head. Folks are gonna ask questions. Hell, some are gonna come looking for the reward themselves. There is no reward, Mack said. That bounty expired years ago. The second man spoke now. Doesn't matter to everyone. Lucas had walked up behind Mack by then. He didn't hide, didn't run, just stood tall. I'll go, he said plainly. I've run long enough. Mack turned. No, you won't. Lucas blinked. You said yourself. I said you're under my roof. Mack's voice had that edge again, calm, but sharp enough to cut, and I meant it. He turned back to the riders. You tell your folks the man they're looking for doesn't exist anymore. He died in a fire decades back. What's left is someone trying to build something, not tear it down. There was another pause, long and heavy. Eventually, the man with the badge gave a slow nod. You always were stubborn. Mack looked him in the eye. You'll need more than that to change my mind. They rode off without another word. That night, Lucas sat on the porch, staring out over the fields that stretched endlessly to the darkened horizon. Mack sat beside him, a coffee in one hand, the stars reflecting in the glaze of his eyes. They'll come again, Lucas said eventually. Maybe, Mack replied, but they won't find a man running. Lucas didn't respond right away. Then, with a voice lower than a whisper, he said, Caleb used to say peace don't come all at once. It shows up in pieces. Mack didn't speak, but something in his chest loosened. The wind moved through the grass below. The porch creaked under the weight of two men who had both, in their own way, stopped running. The sun came up slow the next morning, like it was reluctant to disturb the stillness that had settled over the ranch overnight, the kind of dawn that held its breath, soft light, stretching over the land, painting the hills in warm gold and pale gray, while the air remained cool enough to keep the day's heat at bay. Mack was already up, seated on the porch with a chipped mug in hand, steam curling lazily from the black coffee inside. Boone lay at his feet, ears twitching every so often at the rustle of birds in the grass. The dog had grown quieter with age, but there was still a sharpness behind those sleepy eyes, the same kind of wary peace. Mack had come to understand in himself. Lucas joined him without a word. He carried his own mug now, and though the ritual had only begun a few weeks ago, it already felt familiar. He sat a few feet away, not out of distance but respect to men, side by side, each with their own space to breathe. They didn't speak for a long time, the kind of silence that didn't beg to be filled. It was Lucas who finally broke it, voice quiet, almost reluctant. You ever think about leaving this place? Mack didn't answer right away. He glanced out at the pasture where the fence lines stretched clean across the property, neatly dividing the land but never owning it. I used to, he said. When I first got out here, I thought I'd work the place till my hands gave out, then vanish. No one to bury me, no name on a stone, just part of the dirt. Lucas took a slow sip of coffee, but now he asked. Now Mack let the words settle, like it needed space to figure itself out. Now I think maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing to be remembered. Not for what I ran from, but what I built. What I stood for, when it counted. Lucas nodded, not out of agreement but understanding. I've been thinking about writing Caleb's name somewhere. Mack added, not on a stone or a sign, maybe just a plank in the barn. Something simple, something real. He'd like that, Lucas said. He always said you were better with wood than words anyway. Mack chuckled, low and honest that he did. By mid-morning the work had started again. Summer didn't pause for sentiment. There were troughs to scrub, hay to shift, and a stubborn mare that had kicked her stall gate loose again. Lucas handled the fencing while Mack worked with the livestock. It was quiet work, punctuated only by Boone's occasional bark or the rhythmic clang of tools against wood. Around noon they broke for water. Mack poured 2 tin cups from the pump and passed one to Lucas. You know, he said between gulps, they haven't come back. Lucas nodded. He knew what Mack meant, the men from town, the ones with old grudges and long memories. Since that tense encounter at the gate, they'd kept their distance. Maybe because of Mack's reputation, or maybe because the past doesn't hold the same weight when it's met with stillness instead of fear. They might still, Lucas replied. They might, Mack said, then tossed the rest of the water into the dust. But we'll be ready, if they do. Lucas didn't ask what ready meant. He just understood that it didn't mean weapons or words. It meant standing one's ground. It meant not running. That afternoon, Mack rode into town alone. Not out of necessity, but purpose. He stopped at the mercantile, bought new seed and 2 lengths of canvas. At the print shop, he asked to have a letter scribed. It was a short note to an old friend from another territory, someone he'd served with once, years back, someone who might still have pull with the right people. He didn't tell Lucas about the letter, but that evening, when he returned, he handed him an envelope. It's not much, Mack said, but it might help put the past to bed properly. Lucas turned the envelope over in his hands. He didn't open it, not right away, but his jaw tightened, and he gave Mack a look that said, more than thanks ever could. Why, he asked after a moment. Why do this for me? Mack scratched his beard, thinking, Because I should have fought harder for my brother back then, and because you were there when I couldn't be. That makes us square in a way that no one else will understand." Lucas looked down, then back, up, his voice steadier now. "I never told you," he said, "but Caleb saved my life. Twice." Mack nodded. He had a way of doing that. As the days passed, the tension in the air eased. Folks in town stopped whispering as loudly. A few even nodded again when Mack passed by. Word was getting around not just about Lucas but about Mack's stance, about how he hadn't backed down, how he'd chosen to protect, not prosecute. It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't isolation either. It was something that might grow. One morning, weeks later, a letter arrived addressed to Mack. The seal was plain, but the paper bore an official crest. Inside was a single page. No fuss, no stamp of ceremony. Just a line confirming that all warrants under Lucas Booker's name had been reviewed and formally dismissed, effective immediately. He handed the letter to Lucas without a word. Lucas read it twice, then once more. He folded it neatly, returned it to the envelope, and set it on the porch railing. For a long time, neither man said anything. Eventually Mack stood and stretched, brushing dust from his knees. "Well," he said, "I guess you're free to go wherever now." Lucas looked out across the field. The cattle were grazing. Calm and slow, the sun casting wide shadows across the hills. "I know," he said, "but I'm thinking I might stay a while." Mack gave a slow nod. "Be glad to have you." Boone barked at a passing bird and then lay right back down, tail flicking lazily, and just like that, the last piece clicked into place, not with a bang, not with a storm, but with two men on a porch sharing the kind of peace that doesn't ask for anything more.